Hello everyone, welcome to the Kansas Reflector's weekly video update. My name's Clay Wirestone, I'm the Reflector's opinion editor.
I'm Editor-in-Chief Sherman Smith.
And we are here in our Sunday best, taping the video to come out on Monday, and then on Tuesday it's a day that we have long previewed. It is the Kansas primary election.
Can it get here soon enough, Clay?
Not by my taste. So this is a giant contest. I mean, when I say giant, it's a fair-sized contest. A little more going on, perhaps, than in some primary races in the past. If you want to know all the details about that, I'd urge you to take a look or take a listen to our podcast episode today, in which the entire Kansas Reflector staff goes over basically all of the big races. But Sherman, I'll just ask you here today. What are you interested in? What are you watching on Tuesday?
You know, I do think this is a little bit of an odd primary year for several reasons. We have the constitutional amendment, which I think we'll talk about in a little bit of detail here in a second. It's unusual to me that there are so many contested races on the Democratic side, and not just contested, but you know, in some of these races, the Senate race especially, there are a lot of candidates. 11 Democrats on the ballot for U.S. Senate. You know, it's also unusual because of who the president is. There's a lot of intense feelings about this administration, and it's, you know, unclear what that's going to look like when voters go to the polls.
Well, and not just are there, you know, many, some large groups of people running on the Democratic side, but, you know, especially this last week or two, tempers have flared. It's been hot.
Things have gotten bitter, especially in the Democratic governor's race. You know, I think things have been a little hot on the Republican side for a while. We've seen a lot of money spent on attack ads against Vicki Schmitz, who's the insurance commissioner, seen as the most moderate of the Republicans who are running for governor. But it's really been the vitriol between Philip Sarnicki, the Johnson County businessman, and Senate President Ty Masterson, who has the presidential endorsement. Those two have been hitting each other left and right for months now.
But mainly to the right.
Yeah, right.
And on the Democratic side, you know, similarly in that gubernatorial contest, you have three candidates, but really it's been state senators Ethan Corson and Cindy Holscher who've really been going at one another. Ethan Corson, of course, being endorsed by sitting Governor Laura Kelly. So again, you have that kind of endorsement aspect in there.
Yeah, you know, we've talked about this a number of times over the past 6-7 months now. You know, Cindy Holscher has a lot of enthusiasm, momentum behind her among the Democrats. I'm not really sure how this election is going to shake out, but there's still the perception that she has the lead, at least, going into these final few days. And so we've seen Corson and the governor's office kind of really crank up the heat on it. You know, Corson and Holscher have had some increasingly tense back and forths over her voting record, and you know, she's against the Chiefs deal, but she voted for the law that enabled the Chiefs deal, that kind of stuff that they've sorted through. But lately it's been the governor's office making this accusation in the final week of the campaign that she had tried to somehow blackmail the governor over a year ago, when the governor didn't want her to run or wanted to find somebody else to run against her. We wrote about these text messages at the time a year ago. We chose not to describe it as blackmail at the time because we didn't see that it fit the definition of blackmail. Basically, she was just saying, like, you know, if you keep pressing me, I'm going to fight back. She says, I'll talk about your personal situation. They didn't make this accusation a year ago, but the governor's office, the chief of staff, Will Lawrence, now says that she was threatening, that has accused Holscher of threatening to disclose that the governor had gotten a divorce 6 months earlier. You know, Holscher denies that. It's not explicit in the text messages, but it's certainly led to a lot of interest in this race going into the final days. Corson has refused to comment on it, but the governor who has endorsed him, it seems like her staff is doing the dirty work for Corson.
Well, and also, you know, the Governor Kelly has written an op-ed endorsing Corson that I believe appeared in the Kansas City Star. She's described, you know, kind of implicitly perhaps, Holscher and Kurt Skoog, the mayor of Overland Park, as extremists, I think was the key word there, which seems a little peculiar.
Yeah, Kurt Skoog's the other one in the race, of course, the late entry, and his campaign has basically just been, I'm not one of these two state senators who are bickering with each other.
Well, and also his lieutenant governor candidate,
Jennifer McKinney.
Jen McKinney, has been, I've heard from political observers, she is really, hitting the ground across the state and working very hard. And so
Yeah.
we're not exactly sure what's going to happen on Tuesday, but I think Jen McKinney has become kind of the person to watch out of this election.
Yeah, even if we presume Skoog will not win, who really knows? But yeah, I think she would be somebody to watch on the political scene going forward. We've written about her in the past. Of course, she was a key source for us during the COVID-19 pandemic. She was the health officer and runs a family clinic in Fredonia. And so, as you say, she's been doing a lot of things out in the rural parts of the state.
Likewise, as kind of tensions flare and feelings are hurt on the Democratic side, then on the Republican side, you mentioned Sarnicki and Masterson. It's important to note that there's kind of their own kind of quasi scandal. I don't know if you even really call it that, but certainly Sarnicki wants people to think of it that way in terms of Masterson's job at Wichita State University as director of Go Create. Sarnicki, kind of a maker space there. Masterson draws a pretty good-sized salary from that job, and there's been coverage and questions about that.
Yeah, it's sort of it's one of those things that we've included in stories off and on for years, and you've written about this in columns as well. We had a state senator earlier this spring who kind of hijacked a debate and kind of described it as corruption in plain sight. This idea that he has this job where presumably he doesn't actually have to do anything. He says he's done some things for this. We should note that the Kansas City Star reported on this more recently and made the story just about this. And Sarnicki says it's a do-nothing job. Masterson has defended himself, and now more recently Masterson has hit back. Again, the Star wrote this story, but it was it's like dozens of hours, I think is how they characterized it, that Sarnicki has spent on his private jet outside of Kansas. He's a businessman with a lot of companies. I'm not exactly surprised that he has spent dozens of hours outside of the state during the campaign, but yeah.
But this is also, on both sides, really, this is kind of par for the course of how these things go, because really, notably, these are not fights about issues or policy positions or ideology, of which one can only assume that, Masterson and Sarnicki are closer than not, and likewise that Corson and Holscher are closer than not.
Right. Yeah, I think the other part of this is it's better for these candidates to get the dirt out of the way before the primary, so it doesn't become an October surprise right before the general election, whichever candidate emerges.
So obviously we will see what happens on Tuesday. There are certain assumptions about who front runners are or are not, but when you've got, frankly, even in a three-person race on the Democratic side, when you've got a bunch of candidates running for things,
who knows?
Who knows? Who knows?
Yeah, I think that's the interesting thing, of course, in the U.S. Senate race where we have the 11 candidates. There's the assumption that Adam Hamilton will prevail because he's the pastor of the largest Methodist church in the country. He's been able to raise a lot of money very quickly. He has this large built-in following from the church. There's name recognition there. And then there are so many other candidates that it could fracture the rest of the vote. But I think there are concerns among Democratic voters that he may not really be a Democrat. His views have kind of shifted on both sides of the center line, we'll say, but have basically been close to center throughout. So I think there are Democrats who are uneasy with Adam Hamilton, but then it's, do you rally around Christy Davis, who has a lot of traction in, I think, the rural parts of the state? Do you rally around Eric Murray, who I think has a lot of momentum up in Wyandotte County? There's some other candidates out there that people could turn to.
And, I think I've personally been a little surprised that while Hamilton has certainly been running a full-throated campaign. I don't feel like I'm seeing him a lot necessarily, or feel like he's really, being kind of an electrifying person on the stump, shall we say.
It feels like he has not really created opportunities to get in front of reporters. I think he has been out on the campaign trail talking to folks. And just a quick note on the Republican side, one of the things I'm interested in is how many people among the Republicans vote for Pond Narramore instead of Roger Marshall. Senior reporter Tim Carpenter tracked Narramore down in, I think, in a shipping container outside of Lawrence,
No,
where he
it
lives.
looks like a house to me.
Yeah, very well furnished shipping container. But he's somebody who's registered with an email address that indicates that he's a Rhino Republican in name only. I think he views himself very much as a Republican, but he's a candidate in name only, basically on the ballot. And so it's a good barometer for like how much do Republicans dislike Roger Marshall for any reason, and is it 1%? Is it 10%? Is it 20% who vote for Narramore? I think that'll be an interesting thing to see.
Well, and we've often seen in the past that there's just there's a certain percentage of Republicans, because there are so many Republicans in Kansas, basically twice as many registered Republicans as registered Democrats. I think more than twice, that there's always not always, but often a sizable protest vote.
Yeah.
So, a candidate may get, easily, 80 or 90%, but then, that 10 or 15% can be quite large.
Well, I think there's also, there's that 10 to 15% that may be moderate voters or Democrat voters to begin with. There's also a percentage of Republican voters who just are anti-establishment, we'll say. And so, somebody like Joan Farr actually got a surprising number of votes running against Jerry Moran, who I think is very well liked and respected even across the aisle in Washington. So that's why I'm curious where, how does Pond Narramore stack up against Joan Farr? I think that's a good question.
Well, we'll have to come back to you for the answer on that. And then, we have, the elephant in the room, so to speak. I mean, maybe donkey in the room. We want to make it bipartisan. The animal in the room that we haven't addressed at length so far, it's the constitutional amendment. The question is whether or not Kansas voters should vote for Supreme Court justices up front. Right now, voters do vote for Supreme Court justices, whether to retain them, but that's after they're appointed and seated. So the question is whether or not we just make judges like the other folks who run every few years.
Yeah, we've talked about this before, I think. One of the interesting things to me is we're seeing a lot of complaints down the stretch here about the amount of money that's being spent on this amendment, the dark money that's flowing in both for and against this, the billionaires who are behind this that are trying to get people to vote yes or no. And I think the irony in this, of course, is that by voting yes, you're saying this is exactly the kind of influence I want in every judicial decision forever. Because if you think there's a lot of dark money flowing in around the constitutional amendment, just wait until justices are actually on the ballot. This is exactly what that question would unlock.
And it has been I would say honestly, of all of the races, I think the amendment one is actually perhaps the most hotly contested. There's been a huge amount of mail about it. Our Friday columnist Eric Thomas wrote about some of those mailers. And a lot of TV advertising, a lot of web advertising. People have really been deluged.
Yeah, I participated in a number of public forums to try to educate people about what this amendment is about, what the current system looks like, all of these things, and I have no idea how the vote's going to shake out. I'm bad at predicting these things anyway. 4 years ago, I thought the amendment to remove the right to abortion, I thought that would prevail, and of course it lost by 20 points, something like that. So I have no idea what's going to happen with this amendment vote on Tuesday. But it certainly has the potential to dramatically change the way the justice system works in Kansas.
Well, and the column I'm working on right now, and it will be accompanying this video, is I also think it's important to understand that, the way the amendment is coming before voters, the shape of it all is not in a neutral way. The fact that this amendment is in a primary election in a midterm year, just in general suggests and again, as I just said, we have twice as many Republicans as Democrats in Kansas.
Right.
That's an attempt to shape the electorate that's going to vote on the amendment.
Yeah, independent voters have been trained to not show up for primaries because they can't participate unless they affiliate with one party or the other. Except you can still vote as an independent on this constitutional amendment. You can show up and only vote on that. You don't have to change your affiliation. I just wonder how many independent voters know that or paid attention to really what's going on in this amendment.
Well, and then, you even go back over these last couple of years of how we arrived in this point. There was a bill passed and it became law to supposedly crack down on money from foreign nationals in elections. It's pretty clear that that bill was intended to try to stop dark money from flowing in to oppose this amendment.
I think they wanted to create so much busy work that it would be a cumbersome hurdle for the people who were trying to oppose the amendment.
I think what's interesting is I think in, perhaps a little bit later we can see if that actually had any noticeable effect on this election. I kind of think it did not.
Yeah.
But there was that, and then even you see just some other things leading up to this that I'm not a conspiracy monger, but I think it's interesting that when you see about various election-related issues, Johnson County chooses to close several polling places that are in kind of the urban core, so to speak, while adding new polling places in kind of more rural/conservative areas. Likewise, just this last week, we heard that voters in Wyandotte County, I believe it was, were being sent mail ballots that had an incorrect return address that was being, and so they were getting their ballots returned to them.
Yeah, and I've heard people, they're concerned that a lot of the Democrat ballots in various places, they have all the candidates on the first page, and then it ends before that first page is over. Then you have to flip the page to get to the constitutional amendment. There's a concern that maybe some people are unaware that amendment's on the backside. That one seems like a little bit of a stretch to me, but it's
well, but
all
then
these things
even
add
the
up.
way that the ballot question is asked about the amendment, it's not incorrect, but it's also not.
It's a loaded question.
I think it's fair to say it's a bit slanted.
And I think just to be clear, like this is on the ballot because Republicans, conservatives for years have not liked Supreme Court decisions, especially school finance decisions. And then when the Supreme Court decided that there is a right to terminate a pregnancy in the Bill of Rights, this is on the ballot specifically for those reasons. And then there's some broader decisions that have made people unhappy.
Well, and this has been kind of a hobby horse of some conservatives for a fair amount of time, but that's what it is. And I think what you've seen this time around is very much what you saw 4 years ago. We'll see if it works this time, but it's basically an attempt by folks who oppose the amendment to really do. It's not only that they have to turn people out; it's that it's a lot of education about what the amendment is, what our system is now, what it would mean for the future. And the education is frankly a little heavier this time around than it was for the abortion amendment.
It's the abortion amendment was so much easier to message. It was like, do you think there should be a right to terminate a pregnancy or not? I think with this, it's a lot more complicated. I don't think anybody out there would say, we love the justice system exactly as it is. We shouldn't change it. But it's also hard to say, like, here's why this could be a problem, I think, for the people who oppose this amendment. I think one of the realities, though, is by 2033, the objective would be, if this amendment passes, by 2033 to have a conservative majority on the court.
Yeah.
A lot of this is undetermined, by the way. The legislature in this amendment that gives the legislature the authority to decide how these elections are going to work. If they are partisan or nonpartisan, if they are statewide, or if they're by district, which justices go on the ballot first. All of this is still up in the air.
And to be clear, if the amendment does pass, that's all going to be decided in the 2027 legislative session.
Right.
Because they've got to get it done, but because I believe the first elections under the amendment would be in 2028.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they would be able to finalize this in 28 or not, but yeah, the elections would start in 28.
So, it's a big deal. I don't know. I'm trying to think. There's of course other races here. We encourage you to learn and read about those as well. There's U.S. House races. There are local races. There's a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, the legislative races, the Board of Education. Our intern this summer, Bea Burgess, has written about every single candidate who is running for the State Board of Education, whether they have a contested primary or not. You can find all of those stories. I'm not sure that anybody else has undergone that kind of exhaustive review, but she talked to all of them, and it's the information is there. If you get down to that part of your ballot and you're going, I don't know who these people are, look for that story.
So I think primarily what we would just say is, if you are a Kansan and if you are registered to vote and if you want to make your voice heard on any or all of these races, you have your opportunity to do so.
That's right. And you can stay informed about what happens on election night, of course, by subscribing to us at
kansasreflector.com/subscribe. That's kansasreflector.com/subscribe. That's for our daily newsletter, which is free and comes to you every day.
That's right.
And, stay tuned to our website as well, which will have results on Tuesday. And I am assuming that Sherman and I will be back next week to talk about the results.
We will hope that we know who has won everything by then.
Okay. Take care, everybody.
Bye.